at a time when further cuts to our nation's military are being considered, some are questioning our nation's preparedness and readiness. And much of the talk centers around the overextended nature of our troops, with nearly a quarter of those returning from service in Iraq and Afghanistan reporting symptoms of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, or major depression. Well, how do we best prepare our servicemen and women to lead and mentor our current generation of service personnel? Well, that's the question that motivates our guest on today's program. Dr. Ted Thomas is joining us. He teaches leadership to combat leaders and talks about the effects of PTSD. Kentucky Outlook is next. Stay with us. Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Kentucky Outlook. I'm Barbara Deeb. We're glad you joined us. Well, Dr. Ted Thomas is joining us. He's a graduate of West Point, served for 2 decades before retiring as a battalion commander back in 1998. In his current role, he supervises over 35 civilian and military department members, developing and delivering leadership curriculum for the Command and General Staff Officer course, representing 80 countries and members of each branch of the armed services. Well, as the subject matter expert on leadership and leadership development, he advises and represents the Deputy Commandant and other department directors on matters of leadership education. Dr. Thomas is visiting WKU as a guest of the Boyd-Lubker Visiting Scholars Lecture Series, and we're very happy to have you here. And we could probably spend the next half hour with all your credentials, but we'll talk leadership. How about that? You know, before we get started, I think fundamentally I have to pose this question to you. Are leaders born or are they bred?
Yeah, great question, and the answer is yes.
That's a great answer.
You know, I think everybody's born with some amount of leadership abilities, and some more than others. It's just like some people are born with the ability to play basketball, but you can't teach height. So it's same with leadership. Some people are born with more leadership than others, but everybody can improve and get better in their leadership, whatever their abilities and skills are. So the answer is yes.
That's a good, very diplomatic answer. And so we do have that something in us. And we can look at different situations that might motivate one to become a leader or step up or find some leadership skills that they didn't know existed. So let's talk about the military in particular and developing leaders for the military. Are they the same kind of leaders that we would develop generally? Or because they're in a military situation, does that mean we have to ask for different skill sets?
The leadership principles are the same regardless. However, the emphasis on leadership principles in the military is probably a little different than in the civilian sector. I think with the deployments we've had and the varied missions that we have now, you see a lot more requirements to be influential, to influence people outside the chain of command, to be able to work with folks that are not in the military. So as that young captain deploys to Iraq, he may have to work with a mayor, he may have to work with some sheikhs. There's all sorts of different people that he's going to have to work with that he has no direct control over and can't order around. So when you start to look at the skills and abilities that they need, it's a lot different than it was 10, 20 years ago when I was growing up in the military.
You know, one of the largest components of any leadership study would be ethics, morals, those kinds of things. When you put together a group of servicemen and women who come from all different walks of life, from different cultures, from different moral backgrounds, how do you come to some consensus on this is the base from which we're going to work?
Well, the Army actually came up with their own set of values and morals. And conveniently, it spells out the acronym leadership. And so, but over time, those values have morphed from one to another. I think the key for the military is you have to develop trust, because if you want people to go to war and die for you, they need to be able to trust you. And we've seen some ethical lapses in some senior leaders lately. I think they've always been there. I think what's happened is that they're being publicized a little more, and there's a little more emphasis and more of a microscope on some of the leaders now than there has been in the past. And it's a good thing to clean out the system and to eliminate problems that people do have problems with their ethics and morals. I think that the military is still one of the most respected organizations in the country, and for good reason, is because we do police our own, which is part of being a profession.
When we talk, you know, we're dancing all around leadership at this point and plan to explore it more, but how do we define an effective leader? I mean, that's a tough one.
You know, the leader has, the Army has a leadership requirements model in our doctrine, and it talks about lead, developing, and achieving. It talks about a leader of character, of intellect, and of presence. The bottom line, history defines leaders as being good by those who achieve results. Now, you can achieve results by being a tyrant or by being somebody who is all-inclusive and gets people inspired and is more charismatic. But in the end, when you're fighting the nation's wars, it's about winning the war.
And so the result at the end, but also in the eyes of the beholder. You know, we might still achieve that same goal and get to that end, but I may not have thought that you were that an effective leader. Maybe I thought you were a tyrant, but we still got to the same place. You understand?
That's true.
So a lot of that has to do with perception.
It does. But there's also effects years down the road. So if you look at World War I, we won the war, but we lost the peace and ended up having to have another war to fix the lack of proper ending of the war in World War I. And so we ended up with World War II. After World War II, we had the Marshall Plan, which was a brilliant plan, and ended up rebuilding Europe stronger than it was before, and provided a lasting peace for us in Europe.
Now let's talk about this. You're at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, okay? Right. So you work for, you're the director of the Department of Command and Leadership at the U.S. Army Command and General Staff College at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. That's correct. A mouthful. So you're training our future leaders. You know, you're the guy that's in the classroom teaching and developing strategies and researching how are we going to get the most effective leaders. In general, what you see of those people coming through those doors at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, are they ready?
Yes, they are ready. They're also tired, and the year at Fort Leavenworth gives them a time to regroup, to reflect on where they've been, who they are, and where they're going. And it's a great year for them to be able to sit back and say, you know, what I've done and what I want to keep doing in the future. They're great Americans. For me, it's a privilege to teach them because they've put their lives on the line for their country. They're coming to learn more of their craft, and they're getting ready to go back and possibly put their lives on the line again as they go out and lead larger, more diverse organizations.
So take us through that system. So they've been fighting maybe in Iraq and Afghanistan at this point, and then they get this year at Fort Leavenworth, as you say, as a sort of regrouping, and then 99.9% of the time they're going to head back out?
Well, now that we're drawing down combat, there's not going to be that many that are going to be going back to a theater of operations. But certainly if you take a look at the events in the world, there's nothing saying that we won't be back to war again anytime soon. And I hope our military is prepared. I think we are. I think we have some of the greatest Americans around. It's a great place to work. It's exciting. They're excited to be there and are happy to be able to serve their country.
You know, you talk about these values that the Army has already in place, and we're going to abide by this code. Sharing a common goal is hugely important in leadership. You have to be on that, I hate that dreaded word, same page, but you do really have to be focused and on the same mission.
Yes. When I look at leadership, the Army is founded on a leadership philosophy of be, no, do. And so when you take a look at doing something versus knowing something versus becoming something, we teach people how to do their job. We teach them the why so they understand it. But the becoming is really into the vision piece, and it's the purpose piece. And when you have a purpose or a vision, you can overcome a lot of obstacles to get to where you want to go. And that's what helps bring people along. It's what good leaders do to help bring people along to accomplish the mission. I'd like to use a quick example if I could. I'm somewhat afraid of heights. I don't know if you're afraid of heights.
I get
you
a little
know,
shaky
if
when
I
I'm
put you on a
doing-
30-story building up on a ledge, you know, maybe like a little 6/8-inch ledge, would you feel very comfortable?
I wouldn't, but I've flown with the Golden Knights parachute team, so I don't know. What does that tell
I've
you?
jumped out of airplanes, but I'm afraid of heights.
Okay.
You know, I don't know if you could pay me enough to do something like that. But if you put one of my children out on that ledge, I would go out there after them in a heartbeat without thinking about it. And so my point is that oftentimes our purpose can overcome our fears. And when you have a purpose or a vision that people can get behind, it will overcome their fears and help them to accomplish great things. And that's what our Army does. It's got a great purpose. It's got a great vision.
We talked in the introduction about PTSD, that you would talk a little bit about that, because as you mentioned, many of the people that you deal with at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, they've been in war, they've been in the theaters, they've been in action, and they're coming back for this year at Fort Leavenworth. Sadly, the numbers are increasing. We have more and more showing signs of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. What's even sadder is so much of this is going undiagnosed. And so let's talk a little bit about that for our audience. What do we mean, first of all, when we talk about PTSD?
Well, it's kind of like a disorder of the mind, in that your thoughts are what haunt you. They've been deployed and they've seen some evil, terrible things. They've been shot at, they've been blown up, and fear tends to start to rule their lives to where they don't feel like they can trust anybody. If I can, I'll tell a quick story.
Sure.
A squad leader in Afghanistan befriends a little boy, 6, 7 years old, sells him bread. They give him, you know, food, candy, cookies, gum, or whatever. After they befriended him for a few weeks, they see him, and he's got a little tripwire, and boom, blows himself up and injures every person in the squad. After that, as the squad leader is lying there wondering if his legs are still attached, he's thinking, how could I ever have trusted this little boy? Now, something like that in our country, you know, here, would be natural to do. But then the things that are in war are not natural, and you almost have to have a different perspective. So they come back and they've seen evil, terrible things. They've experienced things where their life has been threatened and in danger. And all of a sudden, things that you used to trust, you no longer trust. Things that used to be normal, like garbage on the side of the road, in Iraq and Afghanistan could hide an improvised explosive device, an IED. And so they start to fear things that the normal person would never even notice, because they're constantly on the lookout and hypervigilant. What that does in the classroom, it affects them because their attention span tends to be a little bit less, because they're continually changing focus to scan their environment to make sure that they're safe and protected. So part of coming back to Fort Leavenworth, we have 16 people in the staff group, and bringing them back gives them also a chance to reflect on their experiences, to talk to other people that have been through similar things, and to kind of work out some of the challenges and fears that they have, and work through them in a time before they have to go back out to the field again.
But PTSD is nothing new to the current wars. I mean, it's always been a part of war, a sad remain, but it's getting a lot more attention now. And why do you think that is?
There's a couple reasons. Obviously, there's a big problem in Vietnam too, and a gentleman named Jonathan Shea has written a couple of great books on how he's worked with Vietnam vets over the years. What they found in studies is that if you have over 19 high-intensity conflict experiences, where you've been in over 19 battles, the tendency to have PTSD starts to increase. Now, when you take a look at the length of our wars with over 10 plus years, and you have people that have 4+ deployments, their likelihood of having more and more intense combat experiences increases, which means their likelihood of getting PTSD also increases.
So 19 seems to be the magic number?
Well, it's a study that was
yeah.
done, and it's kind of leveled out for until you hit 19, and then it starts to increase on the risk of acquiring PTSD.
Okay, so we talk about that we're hearing more about it, but how are we treating? How are we paying attention, especially when I made mention of the fact that it's going undiagnosed in many cases. For what are some of those reasons?
Yeah, let me talk about why it's going undiagnosed. Part of it is, it's like there's a gentleman that works for me who's a pilot. Had 4 tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. He made the comment that if I had reported myself of having PTSD, they'd take me off of flight status. So he said he didn't want to get taken off of flight status. Earlier, people were worried about that it would affect their security clearance, so they didn't want to say anything about security clearance. Now when folks come back, they have to fill out a form, and if you check like block 5, and I'm not sure what block it actually is, but if you check block 5, it says I'm having issues, and you have to go wait in a long line and go see a psychiatrist and start looking at getting treatment. If you check block 4 that says I'm doing okay, you get straight to go and you get to go home. Smooth sailing, you get to see your family. So when you take a look at the incentives, the soldier has been looking forward to becoming reunited with her family for months. And I know when I've been deployed, that's what I think about, is I think about my wife, my children, my family, and getting home. And when it would come down to, I haven't been to Iraq or Afghanistan, but when it would come down to the point that if I had to say, okay, I'm gonna go into this line and have to wait a lot longer, or I can go home, oftentimes they'll check, let me go home now.
So what kind of follow-up is the military doing to ensure that some of these individuals don't fall through the cracks, those with PTSD?
The Army's got, like 900 different programs that they're working on, trying to find out the best one and the best way to handle them. One of the things that they've done is they've looked at positive psychology, that Martin Seligman has a program at the University of Pennsylvania. And they've been trying to get master resilience trainers in every unit in the Army and train folks to help people overcome stress and become more resilient. So they've also got a new pilot project, I think, on moral injury, where they're having people look at computer simulations to try and put them in a situation where it would be a morally ambiguous situation, so that they could kind of inoculate themselves to when they get put in that situation, that they won't suffer a mental moral injury.
But you know, I haven't been in combat, but I suspect when you're in, it's one thing to sit in a simulator and experience that. It's quite a different set of circumstances when you're there in the field, in the trenches, and you have to make that split-second decision.
There's no doubt, because there's the sight, the sound, the smell, the emotions, because it's real people. And that's what ends up sticking with them. And that's kind of the things that end up causing flashbacks when they come back to the States, is they'll have something that'll trigger that emotion and put them right back where they were before. It said that happy experiences happened, so you have memories, good memories of family reunions or different things, and they happened in the past. But traumatic experiences for people with PTSD are happening, so that when something triggers it, the heart beats, the adrenaline starts flowing, and they're kind of in the moment. And that's part of the problem, is that they can't get it out of their brain, and it kind of pops up at sometimes inopportune moments.
Well, we talk about PTSD, but there's also traumatic brain injury, which is affecting a lot of service individuals coming back as well. So talk a little bit about TBI and how that affects training.
It's one of the signature injuries from the war because of the IEDs. When people come back with an arm missing, it's very easy to see that they've had an injury. When they come back with a traumatic brain injury, they look normal. It doesn't look like there's any type of injury, and yet their brain has been rattled so that it's hard for them to maintain concentration. It's hard for them to hold a job oftentimes. And so it is a signature injury. I think we also see that in other sports and athletes. I mean, it's becoming more prominent with NFL as we start looking at brain injuries or concussions, and it's kind of the same type of thing. So it's an injury that's a human injury, in that it's not just a military-related one, but certainly the IEDs have there's a lot of people that end up suffering from that. It is also tied to PTSD, because oftentimes that brain injury from the explosion has created a tremendous amount of fear, and PTSD is fear-based. And so they link the two together, and the PTSD becomes very much linked with the traumatic brain injury.
And the emotion, and not just the emotional toll on the individual suffering the TBI, the PTSD, but the families of these individuals.
That's a great point. Children in families from returning veterans have a higher percentage of ideations of suicide than the normal high school children. A recent study has shown. There's also issues with spouses, with siblings, with parents, because the person that deploys and has seen tremendously evil and bad things, they can't come home and unknow war. You know, the soldier wants to come home and fit back into society just the way they were when they left, but they're not the same person when they left. And as much as they try, they cannot unknow the experiences and the things that they've been through. And they're a different person. And because of the things that they've experienced, they feel some hesitancy to share some of those things with their spouse or with others because they really just can't relate. And so they end up keeping it inside. And oftentimes that will lead to depression or anxiety or anger and lead to marital problems. So then you end up bringing that process home and having problems both with children and spouses and even, like I said, with parents. And
it's a snowball.
It is a snowball.
It's a snowball out of control. So Dr. Ted Thomas is joining us. He's the director of the Department of Command and Leadership at the U.S. Army Command and General Staff College at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. And we're talking about developing leaders in our current service personnel, okay? So you get individuals who've been in combat in most cases or have served and are coming to Fort Leavenworth for about a year, kind of transitioning, and will likely go back out into the field leading. They'll be our leaders. They'll be out there. We talk a lot about mentoring and the importance of not only being a mentor, but mentoring. So talk why that's important.
There's actually three aspects to it. There's coaching, there's counseling, and there's mentoring. And we're all familiar with the term of a coach. You know, you think of a football coach on the sideline, and a coach is kind of in the moment to say, you know, as you're doing this, you can improve here. And that's important. Counseling, so coaching is kind of focused on the present. Counseling, we sit down and counsel with people at least once a year, if not every 6 months or 3 months, to talk about their past performance. So counseling is focused on what they've done in the past and how they can improve. Coaching is focused on the present. Mentoring is really more focused on the future. And that's to sit down with the individual and to say, these are the things that you've done in the past and where you are, but this is how you need to progress to improve yourself in the future. Maybe these are some books you need to read, some assignments that you need to have, some things that you need to do to help prepare yourself. Mentoring is a key part of developing leaders. Many of our great leaders have been developed by great mentors. Marshall is developed by Pershing as one of his mentors. Yeah, and Eisenhower and Patton both had Fox Connor, General Fox Connor, as one of their mentors as they were growing up and learning their skills.
So you see, we do. Everyone needs to have a mentor?
Everyone should have a mentor.
Okay. Everyone should have a mentor. But by the same token, if you have the ability to mentor someone else, be a mentor.
Correct.
Yeah, step outside.
And that's not just in the military. There's lots of youth that need to have good role
models. Well, while we're
and
talking
mentors.
about military and leadership issues, I think it relates across the board.
It does.
I have to ask you this. So as we talked about, you're training the leaders of today and tomorrow in the military. First of all, are we doing enough for our servicemen and women?
That's a hard question to answer. I think part of it, when you look at the PTSD, is the system has been overwhelmed. And the Veterans Administration, there's a lot of backlog. So I don't think we are doing enough. I think we could do better. But then I have a somewhat limited biased viewpoint as well. So I think there's more we can do to
But you also have a unique perspective in that you're seeing these individuals, you know, right after they've come back from combat, and you're preparing them to go back out. So you do have a unique perspective. So always could be more to do, is what you're saying.
I think we could do much better, yes.
And what do you anticipate for the future with these military personnel that you're training? You're going to get them out there, and they're going to be bigger and better, and
they're going to continue to lead our Army into the future. And our Army is the best Army in the world, bar none. But we still have to maintain our readiness, and that's what our leaders are dedicated to doing. Even as we downsize, we're still going to be the best Army in the world. But we have to maintain that focus and not let up our guard, because there's lots of opportunities for people to affect the strategic goals of the United States in a negative way. And we need to have a strong Army so that we can still project the American presence and goals and goodness throughout the world.
And so you leave us then on that optimistic note?
Yes.
All is not lost?
All is not lost.
All
is good. It's good.
It's good. And with you at the helm, I can see why. We've been talking with Dr. Ted Thomas, who serves as the Director of the Department of Command and Leadership at the U.S. Army Command and General Staff College at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks.
That's going to wrap it up for this week's edition of Kentucky Outlook. I'm Barbara Deeb. A special thanks to Dr. John Baker and, of course, the Boyd-Lubker Lecture Series at WKU. Until next time, thanks for joining us.